Rachel a second. Okay, thank you. I don't know why that happened. So now we get Rabbi Chama's memories of home. Were a series of dream scenes, his wife's eyes, the little toddler always underfoot. So now she's made the decision about how old his son was when he left home. The 2 rooms behind the yard of his father's home. So mentioning his father already, bringing him into the tale. At the time, the chance to leave home, I'm just going to give our folks a moment to flip to the other side of the page. The chance to leave home and study in a Talmudic academy far away had beckoned invitingly, so he set off. In the first few years, he would write letters home, but after a while, it was hard for him to do even that. He found refuge in the routines of daily learning. From time to time, he found himself in the arms of strange women. She's making that assumption, but okay. He thought of his son often and took comfort in these memories. So he didn't have a negative view of home, but he kind of gets farther and farther, more and more disconnected from it. Now's where she really takes license, and I'm curious to see how you feel about this. At first, they had expected that Rabbi Chama Bar Bisa would be a great scholar, but he did not have his father's brilliance. He mastered what he was taught, but he did not stand out. He calmly absorbed the material and did not bombard his teachers with complicated questions. By now, 12 years later, it was clear that he would not be asked to stay and teach. The bright dreams of his youth had faded into a lackluster reality. In the last few years, he was drawn less to the Talmudic page and more to the interesting scenes out the window. A father teaching his trade to his son, a man chatting with his wife, a bridge being built over the river. So let's pause and just absorb what she's done with this very short narrative that he was there for 12 years. He was now coming home. So what does that mean? She assumes it means that he was not a remarkable scholar. He was fine, but this wasn't really his passion. This wasn't his strength. And what instead is he looking at? She has him looking at, it's not only the secular, it's the son, it's the wife, and it's the productivity of building a bridge. It's a home life and it's a job. It's a trade. I can't help but think about Ruth Calderon, the secular Israeli member of Knesset, thinking about the yeshiva system that lures in hundreds of thousands of young men, saying everybody needs to study full-time in yeshiva. And by the end of it, some of them have to go get a job. And some of them maybe shouldn't have stayed all 12 years because they could have been a little bit more productive with their time. I see a veiled or not so veiled critique of the yeshiva system. Okay, any comments in the Zoom room before we move on? I see Barbara's hand.
Yes, you could say the same.
What would you be, okay, so what would you be fit to do after so long in a study house? What job would you be fit to?
Yeah, I mean, you have to go now start from scratch, as many of these young men do, young men do. In those years, yeah, it would be start now as an apprentice. Look, they can join a family business. They can join, they go to business. They go into things that they didn't need to go to school for usually. Annie, did you want to chime in with this?
I wanted to say in respect to current days, you get many kids who automatically go through the university path when they would have been better off with a job or a trade or figuring out things, and they spend years in university only to change to something else and something else. And
thank you, Annie. Thank you for that. It's not just in the religious school system. It's in the school system. We make this assumption now. You can't graduate high school and skip college, go to a trade school. It doesn't, it's not respectable.
Especially in the Jewish community, going to a trade. I know people whose son-in-laws are in air conditioning and plumbing, and they're doing really well. And that used to be the immigrant Jewish population was in stores and, trades and plumbers and heating. And some of the kids are doing really well. They take a short course in refrigeration or heating, and then they're doing well. But it's not, you don't hear so many
party.
mothers
Your
saying,
kid is-
my son, the plumber.
David,
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. I just want to tell you, when I flew over, next to me was a young yeshiva student. And he was going to yeshiva, and his plan was to spend his life studying, which was his mission. And his fiancée, soon to become his wife, was going to earn the living and bring the money into the home. And to me, his mission was just to study, and whether he was good or bad didn't seem to matter.
right,
So,
right.
so
Yes.
that's just a comment that I was.
And this
sort of-
actually, this goes to, something we also had mentioned last week, and I know you weren't there, you were busy flying, not literally, but busy landing maybe. But we talked about the sacrifice that the spouse makes, and willingly so. Like she went onto that shidduch dating scene looking for a yeshiva student, because that was the kind of home she wanted to build. And having her husband learn full-time, as a religious pursuit, as a mission, as you say very rightly, as a mission in life, is something that she was looking for, and she will raise the children, and she will bring in the income. And who knows, maybe he'll only be there 5 or 10 years, maybe not, who knows.
But it's a great argument for feminism in a way that perhaps she was also looking forward to professional success.
Women I know from, I have cousins in those communities, and I know that the women are actually more worldly than the men often.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
they're out working in offices and they get more secular education than the men. Sometimes it brings problems into the marriage because there's a mismatch there, right? Her world is much bigger than his. So I've heard that too. I'm not saying they all do. I'm just saying that it can be something very beautiful, but and something very meaningful, but also, a gap between them.
It's a challenge.
Yeah, please.
When she writes a bridge being built over the river, that bridge could have been built by visibly Jewish people. And he could have seen now.
Right.
And I say that
right.
because outside our condominium, I see a man, tall man, about 6'3". He's wearing a construction cap, and he has tzitzis katan.
Oh, amazing. Uh-huh.
And I said, that's really interesting.
It's not
And
what we're usually
not usually what we see. And it turned out that his workmen working in the floor above us had caused a flood. So he came down and said, look, we caused a flood. And long story short, he himself fixed it. And he showed a lot of integrity in the way he did it, and his diligence.
Mm-hmm.
And first time I've seen that.
We think
I'm not that
certain,
diligence, but first time
no,
I've seen. Yeah,
we think of certain careers as
Right.
Jewish careers.
Yeah.
It's got to be the accountant, the lawyer, maybe the teacher, something scholarly.
Rabbi, what kind of profession is that for a Jew?
Right. And this goes to what Annie was saying before about, you're going to tell everybody your son is in plumbing? We don't raise our children to do that, but it has deep integrity. Sure. I remember the first time I spent any length of time in Israel, and seeing a bus driver with a kippah was so strange to me. What kind of job is that for a nice Jewish guy? And that's crazy, because you need the blue collar workers.
But it's our biases that we've been raised.
Yes.
With, so that's
And
I
the
just
upper
wanted to
middle
make a
class
comment that
expectations.
The bridge being
Yeah.
built over the river is also a metaphor. So it's
For
bridging.
bridging
It's bridging.
worlds.
the
Nice,
two
very
worlds.
nice, very nice. Okay, so we are going to move on in the story. Thanks, everyone. His fellow students began returning home to teach and serve as leaders in their local communities, which he hasn't been asked to do. Some of them already accompanied by a legion of students of their own. So that's a reference to Rabbi Akiva. But no students flocked to Rabbi Chama. He was a bit jealous, and his jealousy was tinged with regret about the son he had left at home with no father to teach him the alphabet, let alone Torah and Mishnah. So she's made it so that he's already thinking about this when he encounters his son that he doesn't know is his son. When he finally decided to return home, he did so slowly and methodically, as was his nature. So we made him into a, not a fiery person and sort of a follower, not a leader, but at least he's got a little bit of seichel, right? He's making sure his wife knows he's coming, right? First, he asked permission from the head of the academy, who bestowed his blessing with alacrity, giving Rabbi Chama pause to wonder about what he had not become. Oh, yeah. Poor Rabbi Chama. He finished the passage they were learning, right? He's not going to leave in the middle. He's a good guy, right? He took his leave from his fellow students as well as from the rivers, roads, and the narrow room in which he had slept. 12 years had passed like a dream. In his final month, he walked the familiar roads like a ghost, as if he had already departed. The journey, which had seemed so long when he came, seemed shorter on his return. He was surprised to realize that it was not so far. Almost like he could have gone home for a visit. But it never occurred to him. Right? He could have, I forgot, that's the next line here. He could have returned home at least once or twice over the course of the past 12 years. Each time he would pass a young man chopping wood or driving a wagon or selling fruit, he thought of his own son. Had his boy learned a trade? Did he know how to sign his name? The rumors about Ben Hakinai, a fellow scholar in the academy, who had frightened his wife to death when he returned home without warning after many years away, had spread among his fellow students. When he approached the hills that surrounded his village, I'm sorry, I just realized the chat. It was Max schlepping, David schlepping from Israel, better than schlepping from Chicago. When he approached the hills that surrounded his village, Rabbi Chama was preoccupied by that horrible scene. And now he's quoting from that story in the Talmud. She lifted her eyes, her heart saw him, and her soul escaped. We had read that last week. What happened with the wife of Hakinai. He had resolved that he would not do what Ben Hakinai had done. A written note was already waiting between his folded clothes. His wife knew how to read the letters of the alphabet, because of course, women were usually not literate. Certainly many men were not. In letters as large as those used to write the blessing over the new moon, which had to be legible even at night. These little references to other halachot. He had written, coming home in blessing and peace, and had signed Rabbi Chama. His wife would prepare the home in his honor. A candle would be lit, and the table would be set as befits a man of Torah. He smiled to himself. He was flooded with a sense of pure and total happiness. His legs carried him over the hills to the village as if the road were gliding underneath his feet. So what he's happy about is his home and his wife. And yeah, he's coming in with his head held high. I'm a Torah scholar now. I've put in the time. Coming home with his PhD. But Lord knows there's so many unemployed PhD students or people who can't, find their way in academia after their degree. As planned, he did not go home immediately, but turned first into the small local study house. So we had debated last week about where was this study house? Was it far from home? Was it close? Why would his son have been there? So she's made the decision that it's a local study house, which makes sense, that he's coming close. He's already sent word up ahead, but he's pausing before he gets home to make sure the letter gets home and his wife has time to cook and light the candle and prepare. There, as a child, he used to sit on the bench attentively and dream of becoming an important scholar like those who visited from afar, like his father. So has he become like his father?
No.
Not exactly. He's gone through the motions. He's done everything he could, but he didn't have maybe the raw talent or the true interest. Now he sat waiting until he could be sure that his letter had reached home. Then someone approached him and he was jolted out of his reveries. a local student recognized his cloak, type of cloak worn by those who study in the distant academies. So we debated this also. Why would the boy have come to approach him? How would he know who he was? Why would he assume he was a Torah scholar? So she accounts for all of this. He's wearing a foreign garment, and it's something like, you know, you see a yeshiva boy with the black hat and the tzitzis, and he's got a little handheld Talmud with him. Like, you kind of know him when you see him. He's pale. I'm going back to now our Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish story, right? People who are in the study house are pale. They haven't been in the fields. So you kind of know, one when you see one. The boy greeted him with words of blessing and sat down before him. Play a game of chess. Remember we were talking about that last week? Rabbi Chama was pleased to see this young man, eager to learn from him. Like, oh, okay, I'm ready to teach. This had always been his dream, that local students would thirst for his Torah. The young man, without any preamble, rushed into questions from a chapter in the tractate of Talmud that deals with property damage. The young student was well versed in the details of the law, and his thoughts were well organized. So he sees already, this is someone who knows his stuff, this kid.
No learning discipline.
He repeated the complicated passage from memory. And now what she's done is she's quoting that passage from Talmud of this debate. By the way, just to explain, it's not uncommon for one of the sages in the Talmud to only make an appearance once or twice or three times in the whole Talmud. Rabbi Chama is not very notable. And as I started looking, like, there aren't that many places where his name comes up. It's basically that story, this debate, maybe one other time. So it actually lends credence to her theory here that he was pretty unremarkable. All we know about him are these stories. And by the way, he did live in the land of Israel around the 2nd century. So the early part of the Talmudic era, 2nd or 3rd century, something like that. He repeated the complicated passage from memory. Quote, a pipe irrigates the yard of a neighbor. The owner of the roof where the pipe originates comes to close off the pipe. The owner of the yard stops him, reasoning, just as you have a right to my garden as a place to spill your water, so too do I have a right to the water from your roof as a way to irrigate my garden. He paused, and the expression on his face bespoke calmness and command, something that seems Rabbi Chama doesn't have. It seemed to Rabbi Chama Bar Bisa that he was among the finest students in Babylonia. The man said, we hold that he has the right to stop his neighbor from closing off the pipe. What do you hold? He asked Rabbi Chama with rapt attention. Rabbi Chama tried to answer, but he could not. The passage did not register in his mind. His swarming thoughts impeded his concentration. If only I had stayed here, he thought, I could have had a son like this. He struggled. So is he thrown off because this is like, getting right to his dream and his agitation about having been away for so long? Is he struggling also because he's not such a great scholar?
Yeah, I think it's that one, because otherwise he could have come up with an explanation even if it wasn't supported in the text.
Yeah, he
He would have been able to give.
He struggled to collect his thoughts and then said, no, he cannot stop his neighbor.
Yeah.
So that means the opposite, that the person who has the garden has to allow the person who owns the pipe to stop it up. Which, by the way, David, thank you, our lawyer, said that Canadian law is
So in Quebec
is
law,
like the sun.
so
or Quebec.
I hadn't, for some reason, I hadn't connected it was a pipe. If it was flowing water, you couldn't stop it, but a
Okay.
pipe, I'm not sure.
Oh, okay, it's fine. We'll quote you on
Like the
that.
struggling bar.
But it's really, it's
Rabbi Hama.
please, this isn't the kind of question you answer every day about irrigation pipes. The young boy looked at him in surprise. Rabbi Chama was disturbed by a vague memory. His father, he recalled, had ruled that the man could indeed stop his neighbor, as had the young boy. So now he's realizing, oh my gosh, in my haste, I disagreed with my own father's opinion, and this boy is matching my father's opinion, is is ruling a halachic psak like the grandfather. And so Rabbi Chama kind of realizes he's messed up, but he's already said the opinion. It's almost like it's already now recorded for posterity. And he probably got it wrong. And in this moment, you have grandfather and grandson on one side of the halachic argument and the father himself standing alone on the other side. And there's no bridge.
Yeah.
Okay, the time for the afternoon prayer passed while they were absorbed in intense study. So they must have kept going and debating and discussing. The student did not leave him alone, like a hungry man who seizes upon a hot loaf of bread. The teachings of Rabbi Chama helped the young student sort out parts of the picture. Some arguments were new to him entirely, and some shed new light on what he already knew. So Rabbi Chama is still a teacher. He has spent 12 years. He does have knowledge that this child doesn't have. But it seems like it's a struggle. Now she's going to bring in, again, the grandfather. Something of the discomfort that was always there between Rabbi Chama and his father was present too between Rabbi Chama and the young student. A sense of self-doubt nestled uncomfortably in Rabbi Chama's heart. When they eventually stood to pray the afternoon prayer, he saw that the student was taller than he was.
Well,
Isn't that interesting
It
that she
is.
decided to do that?
Yeah.
The student was taller. They had been sitting. When you're sitting, it's like, this has happened to me in Zoom situations. You can meet someone on Zoom. I remember having a teacher that I had a course with on Zoom and then met him in person for the first time. And I was like, he was 6'2". I had no idea because I was always eye to eye with him on the Zoom screen. So this too, they were sitting and then they stood and he realizes now this student is greater than I am, taller. The student moved lively and prayed fervently, his legs planted in the ground and his eyes tightly shut. Rabbi Chama remembered his home, a place of rest and of shelter. His feet hurt from the journey. He prayed quickly and set his steps toward home, which explains why he's going to get home first and the son's going to walk in after. Passers-by greeted him with blessing, but looked at him quizzically, as if trying to remember why his face seemed so familiar. Can you imagine coming home after 12 years? And there was no Instagram. He came to the small alley where his house stood, painted an inviting shade of blue. This is a good sign. The pathways in the yard had recently been washed, and the pleasant smell of fresh leaves hung in the air. Do you remember when Chachi and I couldn't even find the paths home to his house? This is a very different story. The paths are clear, the smell is fresh. Rabbi Chama, flushed with emotion, cried out in greeting and opened the door. Careful not to rush in too suddenly, he hesitated on the threshold for another second. His fear was dispelled by the familiar sound of his wife's voice. His eyes, which had still not adjusted to the darkness in the home, were greeted by a figure in brightly colored robe. That means she got dressed up for him. He was surprised that he had forgotten how beautiful she was, how freely her body flowed when she walked. He was so happy that he had come home. They looked at one another and did not speak. He enjoyed the silence. After all the talking and talking and talking and talking, the words of Torah, there's just silence. There's comfort there. He sat by the table, the oil lamp lit, right? Just as he had imagined. This is his dream come true. The oil lamp lit as on Shabbat, and the table laid out for two, as it had been each day before he left. He turned to wash his hands and to freshen his face from the journey. The cup of water he poured over his hands trembled when he held it. When he returned to the room and came to sit by the table, the bright student whom he had met earlier in the local study house entered. Rabbi Chama was taken aback. He realized that the student had probably come to ask him more questions, and he was not thrilled about resuming their conversation, especially not in front of his wife. He wants to keep his pride, right? Still impress her. Still, he felt that he had no choice but to stand up out of respect for the student and his breadth of knowledge. A long moment of silence passed until he heard of the voice of his wife tinged with a trace of irony and bitterness. Since when does a father rise before his own child?
Mm.
He slowly lifted his eyes and gazed at his son, who was sitting at the table holding the cup of wine, looking very much at home.
Ouch.
Did you notice how she had, I didn't notice this before. He lifted his eyes and gazed. It was the same phrase that Rabbi Chakinai's wife had, that she lifted her eyes and then had a heart attack.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And
We
that's
don't know
it?
what
That's the end?
That's the end. Are you disappointed?
Well,
Oh, Barbara, tell us the truth. What would you have written next?
I don't know. I guess I'm so used to some kind of closure. So,
Yeah. There's not closure in the original story either.
that's true.
This is the end of the original story.
I like.
Does
that
a
there's
father
people-
stand before his child?
No.
She goes into these reflections. I'm not going to read every word of it, but
David and Max have something to say.
okay, I'm gonna let folks in the room talk, but I'll just say that she does, she mentions the Hakinai story, the other stories. She mentions this, the tragic, the role reversal of the son and the father. We actually photocopied the rest of it. She gets into Oedipus, where the father replaces the son replaces the father, excuse me, in the home. I would like to invite
question.
David had something to say, and Farla
Max.
and Max. Okay, 1, 2, 3. David.
Yeah, I would just say that his decision is without any rationale to it. I would have thought that, especially in Talmud, a rabbi that gave a decision on anything would give him the logical process of how he reached that decision. But here he just comes out with a decision, and that's it.
Right. Yeah. Often then, well, what will often happen in a Talmudic debate is that they'll present two sides. Let's say Rabbi so-and-so says this, Rabbi so-and-so says that. And then they'll probe it. Well, why does Rabbi so-and-so say this? And how do they account for the other one's position? And then you'll say, well, why does the other rabbi say that? How do they deal with contradictory other texts or something? We don't get any of that. And so she makes it about his being flustered and offering a poor argument.
Oh, okay.
Or unsupported.
So the whole story here is her invention, the author's invention. Is that right?
Well, what we had looked at last week was this debate of the pipe actually does in another Talmudic text. It's not in this story, but it is Rabbi Chama bar Bisa says this, and Rabbi Oshaya, his son, says something else. And this debate is in the Talmud in another location. So she just brought it right in. She thought, what could they be arguing about? Maybe it's this. Let's put it here. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But there's also no mention of the emotion. It's cold somehow, Here's a man who discovers his son after all these years, and
well, we
anyway.
don't know what
What's
happens
happened?
next. We don't know after the wife. They stand there, the three of them.
Yeah.
And the wife says, "This is your son," and then that's where it leaves us. Don't you know these like a creative choice
It's
in
great.
short film and in all kinds of books
Literary
and novels.
license.
Yeah. You stop and you leave the cliffhanger, and then the reader has to imagine what happened next. I want to give Carla a chance to
Max.
say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, to follow up on that, I was just wondering, like, what do we learn from this story?
Okay, so what are we meant to pull out of this? And I'm wondering, Max, did you want to speak to that? I don't know or you wanted to say something else?
No, I was just going to agree with Barbara that I was really hoping that Ruth would continue the scene and give us the what happened after. So I'm just agreeing.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you. I think we can build that here. We can extend the midrash but let's answer Farla's question first. What are we meant to learn in this tension between home, family life on one side, and Torah scholarship and leadership on the other? Has there been Is there a critique here? Is there a sacrifice that was too big? Is there a nachas quotient maybe? Like, go do your thing because your child will find their path too. And Annie has a hand. Are they happily ever after, right? And Naomi wants them to be happily ever after, question mark. Annie, go ahead.
I think it's the universal story of life balance of the parent who works hard and suddenly his child's grown up and then they don't know them anymore. They think of them still as that child, and the teenagers and the young people who say, my father doesn't understand me. And, my father, they talk to their grandparents. These days, grown-up kids are lucky enough to have grandparents. And sometimes I talk to my grandson more than he talks to his mother. Like, it's just the
You're
time
very
of
lucky
life.
indeed.
Lucky you.
It becomes a universal story.
Yeah. I can't help but think, you remember that song Cats in the Cradle?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Where the dad, yes, Cat
Yeah.
Stevens, the dad, yes, throughout the son's childhood, the dad says, not now, not now, I can't be with you.
Right.
And then finally, the son's grown up and
the
the
says,
dad
"Come
is
spend some
saying,
time
come
with me."
hang out. And he says, well, I really liked you, Dad, but
The
the
kids.
kids have the flu and work is calling and it's
Just like
been,
me, he's just like.
yeah,
he
he's
grew up
grown
just like me.
me. Right. My boy was just like me. It makes us wonder, is the son now going to go off to yeshiva for 12 years?
There's,
Yeah, please,
wanna go
Richard.
No, you go first.
so, there's a lot of irony in this story because, we know something that the players don't know. We
Right.
know that it's his son and
Right.
so on. So there's a lot of irony where there's dramatic tension. What's going to happen at the end with all this irony? And there's additional irony about because Ruth Calderon has said the wife greets him, tremendously,
Yeah.
right? But then
Yeah.
she says, as Calderon says,
Mhm.
trace of irony and bitterness.
Right.
So,
I was thinking exactly.
yeah. So now all of a sudden,
that.
she's interpreting, when does a father rise before his own child? Is that she's a little, she dressed beautifully, she did everything nicely, but now the first time she speaks, she's not happy. She's a
Yeah.
little
there's an
bitter.
edge. Yes.
Yeah. And his whole journey was loaded with regret.
Mhm.
Everything, his life and his not being with his son and so on. Finally gets home and there's still regret. So she really is upping the amount of regret and bitterness.
Yeah. It's like she's made this sacrifice and now she sees the price that she paid. Do you think so? I love the way that you reminded us we know something he doesn't know, and she knows something they both don't know. We thought about that last week. I want to kind of double down on that. She's the one that holds that truth, and she's the one between father and son, and they've both lost, but her loss is, I don't know, is greater, she's the one who articulates the loss, her sacrifice for the family in that moment. Please go ahead.
Okay,
that's-
I want to speak to your point because I think until he rose before his son, she could imagine him to be the great scholar she hoped he would turn out to be after 12 years. And see, until that point, when first of all, he doesn't recognize his own son. Second of all, he doesn't take his pride of place. I'm the father.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
there's until that
She
point,
realizes
she
now.
could imagine, oh, my
that's
husband is
interesting.
coming back in triumph. He's a great scholar. And then she said, what? He's standing before this yeshiva bacher. Okay, I have to finish my metaphor, my symbolism of the conduit, because a pipe is a conduit. It leads from one place to another, from a higher ground, the roof, into the garden of the new seedlings and what's coming. And, the transmission of knowledge and the pride of seeing your children surpass you, that should be
Mhm.
something that we strive for.
Right.
But it's
right.
it's a struggle because you want to still have your place and your kids to
pride.
respect and ask your advice. But at a certain point, your child is going to be wise, maybe wiser than you.
And he
So
can't
there's
feel that pride because also
it's
He-
an
it
admission of
goes
his
back-
own failure.
It also goes back to his childhood and his feelings of failure
Yeah.
vis-a-vis his
So-
father.
So to
in
me, the
this
pipe
equation.
is the 3 generations, and that's what I was trying, I know last
okay,
week I
yeah.
was being a bit cruder in my
No, no,
transmission.
no,
But that's it, and do you have a right to stop it up at the end? No, the children may be greater than you. You have to let it flow. Anyway, it's.
I like
it's-
that.
Well,
it's-
Very nice.
I-
There's some comments in the Zoom. Go ahead, Farla.
That's a very interesting point, and that you bring this up. However, the story, I'm just like, this is the way they do the stories. And like, what's the point? What are we learning from reading these stories? Is it to provoke discussion?
Are you asking a more general
I'm-
question about these Talmudic stories?
Yes, like this particular
Mhm.
story, a lot of the other stories. And I'm wondering, there's all this debate going on, but in the end, what do they learn? Are they debating to learn to debate?
I think they are debating these very big life questions. And they're also trying to figure out, is this the ideal way to be? And by the way, the page of Talmud continues after this story, goes into the Rabbi Akiva story, which we had mentioned that he was away 24 years. And then it says his wife sacrificed for him. And then her daughter did the same for Ben Azai, for her husband, that this is something that goes on from generation to generation. And I don't know if that's also a critique of that or an acknowledgement that if you make this choice, your children will think that this is required of them. These are here for us to engage with these questions. Sometimes, but to your point, Farla, sometimes the Talmudic stories are directly connected to a halachic bottom line. Like, we're going to tell you this story of these 2 rabbis because it's going to show, you see, he did have a roof and he did have a garden and they let the irrigation pipe flow. And so we can learn that you have to let the water in. This isn't that kind of story. It's kind of, remember at the very beginning of our series, I said there's a garata and there's halacha.
Yeah.
There are the stories and there are the legal conversations. And sometimes there isn't a clear, legal bottom line to these stories, but it's more of an ethical tale. Marilyn.
I just wanted to comment on the technical way that Ruth Calderon writes the story.
Please.
So it's like a piece of music. When the music stops, there is silence, and then the clapping.
Yeah.
Because first you have to go through the emotions, and the emotions are unique to each person. So I believe, with all due respect to Farla, I don't think there's a specific parable here in terms of learning. I think it has to do with questioning. I mean, you have to question the wife. Usually the wife is supportive of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the husband is mediocre. Why doesn't she accept it? She must have known that when she married him. It didn't matter
Not
whether
in
he was a
Gloria's
great
theory.
scholar.
Gloria's theory is that she's only now realizing that those
But
12
like
years were in
David
vain.
said, it didn't matter if he's going to be a great scholar
Yes.
or a mediocre scholar.
That's right.
He's going to study.
She said yes to this shidduch, knowing that.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So all I'm saying is that Ruth Calderon uses silence at the end without a specific conclusion to allow each of us to
Mhm.
work through the story. So she engages us.
Yeah.
This is an engaging story. We're part of the story.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, she's asking us to do what we're doing right now. And she ends with the rhetorical question. A father stands for his son. I want to read to you
How nice.
this one paragraph at the end of
And
Ruth's
before you do that, can I
reflection.
ask you?
Go ahead, Sandra. Yes.
What in the Talmudic story, because I don't have it in front of me, does the wife have that same attitude, no matter whether he's mediocre? I don't remember that coming up. She doesn't.
So
She doesn't
here's the
know.
story. And the mediocrity is not explicit at all in the story. The story just says he left for 12 years and then came home. So she is inferring that the fact that he came home alone, not like Rabbi Akiva with all these thousands of students, she's inferring a whole subtext here that he has been an unremarkable student. And the Talmudic story does have that ending as the ending. Does the father stand before his child?
I understand that, but my question is, you can have different levels. It's not all, it's not black and white. Maybe the father does have a certain level that is above and beyond the average, but the son far surpasses. I don't remember from the Talmud. I just remember he doesn't know who he is. And out of respect, he stands because this is a great Talmudic scholar. So
that's what I
could have. We don't know what his level of learning and his accomplishments. Okay, it's not Rabbi Akiva didn't bring back students, but he might be a very accomplished scholar. But we don't know that because he hasn't taught it.
Sandra, I have the screen share that I have up is the story itself, if you can see on the screen share, and it doesn't tell us explicitly about the level that Rabbi Chama has achieved. It just says Rabbi Chama sees this is a brilliant student and he grows faint. So he grows faint. Maybe he's intimidated. Maybe he's overwhelmed. Maybe he's growing faint because he's about to say, "Oh, I could have had a son like this." But he's impressed with this. And
in the Talmud, what does it say in comparison?
This is the Talmud story.
Oh, this is the Talmud. This is not Ruth Calderon. Okay.
No, this is, you see at the bottom, it says Ketubot 62b.
Yes.
This is it. Yeah. This is it.
Naomi, 2 comments. Did the son know?
Did the son know who? It seems the son did not know who he was. He just knows that he's a Torah scholar that came from afar.
But in Ruth Calderon, he recognized the cloak. It's kind of like a Joseph story.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
I'm very surprised.
And then I see Barbara has a hand. I haven't forgotten you, Barbara.
The conversation was very uplifting. And this week, I just feel it's very sad. It's very bitter. Why was it
uplifting last week?
Well, I felt like the conversation was more, we had many ideas, we saw different perspectives, but this is just, it's a bitter story. It's sad.
It seems to be a critique.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it brings more of the opinion of of Ruth Calderon into the story rather than the Talmud story stays neutral and lets us come to our own conclusions.
Yeah.
Maybe it's possible. Barbara, go ahead.
Okay, so I thought that was very interesting what Ruth Calderon did with his time in the study house. And she mentions the fact that he occasionally slept with strange women, and that he looked out the window, he sees a man chatting to his wife, and then he looks at a bridge being built. And I thought of the bridge not so much as workday construction or somebody doing material work, but there is a bridge. The bridge is between his own brilliant father and his brilliant son. And he is like the water flowing underneath. He's here and gone, and he's not one thing or the other. He's in flux, and never becomes either the raging river of study, of brilliance, or the father. He never acted as a father to his son. So I thought there was a sadness inherent in this idea of watching the bridge being constructed.
You know what? I'm going to connect this to our weekly Torah portion, because what you're describing as the brilliance of the grandfather and the grandson, and the way that the son in between is or almost a conduit. There are many commentaries that talk about Isaac, Yitzchak, in that way. Abraham was the founder. Jacob, the grandson, is the beginning of the nation. Yitzchak, he digs the wells that his father dug. He's the victim, or I don't know, accomplice of the Akedah, but and he gives the wrong blessing to the wrong kid. He manages to be the conduit between Abraham and his grandson Jacob, but he's pretty unremarkable.
Actually, I've seen commentaries that called him simple-minded.
Oh, wow, I haven't seen that.
Because how did he get his wife? She came to him, like she
Yeah.
brought him.
Yeah, right. Everyone's doing things for him.
Yeah,
They're bringing him, they're doing for him. And I've seen some people paint that in a positive light, saying you don't always have to be the leader. Sometimes you have to be the one that carries it forward, that is the conduit. Like we can't all be a Jacob, but the world needs Yitzhaks also, saying that
And
I'm
all be
here
above average.
to translate. What is that? Where everyone's above average and the radio show.
Yes. Prairie Home Companion.
Yes, thank you. The Prairie Home Companion. We're
Oh,
all
everybody's above average.
Everybody's above average.
yeah,
that's right.
yeah. We had that in our family. With my grandmother used to say everyone who had the Gold family genes was exceptionally good looking and brilliant, something like that. Something a grandmother could say.
Hard to stand out. though,
Yeah,
back
yeah,
then.
that's her maiden name. It was like or her. I think hers. Oh, she said hers were the brains, and her grandfather. My grandfather's side was the good looks. Perfect, because we had all the right genes.
That's the genes.
But I do want to read just the last paragraph of Ruth Calderon here. And actually we did photocopy all the way to the end, including her reflections. So I'm zooming down. This is Ruth in her own word. Perhaps this story, that's where I'm reading from the very,
Yes.
the last full
54.
page 54 in our booklet. Perhaps this story is giving voice to the dispute between scholars of the land of Israel and their Babylonian counterparts about whether a student should leave home to study Torah. Perhaps too, the two stories attest to a strong opposition to the practice of living as a married hermit, which was common in Babylonia. And maybe the storyteller is ascribing a certain power to a man's wife, known in the Talmud as his home, as we mentioned last time. Beit Hu, Bayit Shalo, his home. Because only in her presence can a man find inner peace. So that's her insertion into the story, that whole lighting the candle and the inviting home. But we do see that he's eager to get home. The Torah teaches in the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. In other words, as this story may be suggesting, first a man must find a woman to bind himself to her, and only then can he reflect the image of God and live a life of Torah.
That's pretty
saying.
strong.
She's saying, don't sacrifice the woman or the home. Yeah, it's strong. It's a perspective. She's holding a perspective here. I don't think it's unfounded. And this debate, it happens within the ultra-Orthodox community as well. And I know I have one of those cousins who said, her son, one of her sons, is not fit to sit and study. And she had to send him to a faraway yeshiva so that the people locally in Lakewood, New Jersey wouldn't know that she was actually sending him to a yeshiva that was included a trade school, included, not just learning, but also playing basketball. But she couldn't do that at home in New Jersey. She had to send him off. It was, I forget where the school was, somewhere in the US, but it was a different state. So it's not black and white, no pun intended, in the ultra-Orthodox community either.
Yeah.
So this is not me, ranking on the other community that makes this decision to study Torah. I'm just saying that this tension, it's not just secular Israeli versus religious. It's not. That would be to simplify it. Final words from our Zoom room. I see Farla, and anyone else have any final? And then we're going to come to our in-person room. Okay, go ahead, Farla.
The more I reflect on this story, it's kind of sinking in. I feel that it's also pointing out in life that there is average, there's above average, and that we should know this, we should accept this in life. Not everyone is this brilliant student.
Right. And unfortunately in the schools these days, it's like everyone has to take a leadership course. Yes. Everybody, the teacher in the room agrees.
Yeah.
Not every student can be above average. Where's the bell curve then? Right? What's that, Farla? You were about to say something?
No, I think it's a good lesson, actually.
Good, I'm glad. You see, you answered your own question. What are we learning? Okay, and what's that, David?
No, that was a laugh.
Oh, okay, good, good, good.
Yeah,
The
I
laugh from
agree
the land of
I agree
Israel.
with that, Rabba, that the idea of the generations, you have this golden eketa of the 3 generations. Some are going to be very, outstanding, some will be mediocre, some will be, and so on. We have in English the proverb, a chain is as strong as its weakest link.
That's right.
And you need,
Yeah.
even if the link is weak, if you don't have that link there, everything is destroyed. So I see this
Good,
more as
yeah.
a acceptance of, some will be great, some will be mediocre, some will be so-so. Thank you.
Right, right. Thank you, Francis. Richard, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I keep thinking of the pipe, the actual story in the Talmud that the son and the father are discussing. And I keep thinking of that pipe that you would think under law that the person who has the water, and water originates in his roof, that he would be able to shut off the pipe. And of course, the majority opinion here is that's not right, because now there's an expectation of the person where the water came through saying, no, not so fast. I use that water. In fact, I benefited from it, and maybe I conducted myself in a way by not getting another irrigation thing, so that my expectations now have, I suffered for those expectations. I paid the penalty.
Yeah.
You can't shut off the water now. I don't have an alternative.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that, now take that to the story here. The father, in a sense, he's thinking, well, I wasn't there to educate my son.
Right.
So I shut off the water. My son didn't get water. No, the water kept going.
Yes.
From
Yes, and Torah is water. In many
There you go.
stories,
Yeah.
Torah is likened to water. You can't stem the tide.
Right.
Beautiful. That is right.
Yeah.
The grandfather
Yes,
to
yeah.
the grandson.
Yeah.
And he's the
And
pipe.
it's natural water. It's not that he provided the water from a
Right,
pump.
right,
It's,
right.
I'm picturing it a roof
Oh,
with an
okay.
eaves trough,
Right,
and
right,
in
right.
which case it's.
But
doesn't
still, it
even come
originated from his
Yes, well,
property.
yes, exactly,
That's
but
right.
he can't say, if it weren't for me making the well and bringing the water, he didn't do that, it came
Yeah.
from.
And Quebec law changed recently. Before Quebec law would have been, I don't know in this particular case, because I don't remember that far back, but going back to law school, I didn't do this kind of law, roof pipe law.
Yeah, yeah,
But
Ruth Calderons.
That's good. That's good. But Quebec law changed a few years ago where they said, equity is more important. It's not the strict law. You take in all the circumstances.
yes,
So now
yes, yes.
the expectation of the person who accidentally had the water, Quebec law says, no, you have to take that into consideration. Yeah.
I
Thank
think
you.
one of the messages that we have to learn from this is everybody has their specific skill set. And we have now, in our culture, a respect for brilliance, like academic excellence, and that's garbage, because when you need a plumber, you need a plumber. And the plumber also has academic excellence, because they're really learning all of the things that could go wrong, and they're able to diagnose like a doctor would for arterial blockages. So it's a question of each person has their worth, and I don't think it's secular versus academic.
Religious right. No. I'm conscious of the time. We have to end. It's a little bit past the hour. So thank you. Next week, I'm away at a conference. We are not meeting next week.
That's what I thought, but in the
It will-
in the bulletin, it said there was a class next week.
Oh, no.
And I said, no, I think she's away next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna make sure they
Yeah.
write that notice. And also it will go in our email, like Wednesday morning, you'll get a reminder. There is no class today.
Yeah,
So
but you
that
don't want to
means
be
that-
disappointed at the last minute. So
I'm
better we should
telling
be
you right here
sad for the
now,
whole
and
week.
anyone else. I see this chat. That means that we will have only one class when I get back. We'll do one class December 14th, and then we'll break for the winter holiday season, come back in January. So there's a lot of pressure on that one class, because we're not gonna have time. I've been thinking about finding a way to bring in Hanukkah. I have some ideas, so I can promise it'll be fun.
When in January do we resume? Do you know?
I think because I'm just gonna come back during the week, I'm thinking to resume on January 18th. So we're gonna skip 4 Wednesdays.
Okay,
That's it.
thank you for
We're
letting
gonna
us
skip
know.
4. I'm actually, we are taking the kids on I have to get in touch with Max. Is she still in the room? We're taking the kids on a long road trip and we're gonna be in Chicago for